Testing.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Y'all can talk back. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. All right. I don't want y'all to feel like I'm holding y'all hostage or nothing. But at this time, like the Chief of Staff said, if everyone can take out their phones and silence them. But before you silence them, make sure you go to cmvny.com and share. Or you can go to the Facebook page and share it. We're going to take a moment to do that. All right. And it's shared. So, greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for coming by. Those who are looking online, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you like and share the page because we're going to actually hear some wonderful information from our comptroller. Any information that is information that governs the city is wonderful information because it shares information and it shows what transparency looks like, right? So we get to address any information that comes forth and we get to handle it together, so that's an awesome thing. I'd like to acknowledge all of our elected officials, our city council persons. I'm City Council President Derek Thompson. The other city council persons are actually joining via Facebook Live and things of that nature, but we have our wonderful mayor in the building with us today, Mayor Sean Patterson Howard. We have the Chief of Staff, Kristen Breeze Reed. We have our city clerk, Tanisha Walters. We have our corporation counsel, Brian Johnson. We have our legislative aide, Elias Goodsight. I'm trying to see if my vision can hit the back of the room. Yes, I'm sorry. We have our fire commissioner, Deborah Norman, here. I know we have, I'm sorry? Oh, I didn't even see, where? You trying to hide. Our recreation commissioner, Sylvia Gatson, there. We're Youth Borough. Dina Williams from Youth Borough. Ted Bill, I didn't see Ted. Oh, I see him. We usually fight before the thing, but I see him now. So Ted Bill is here as well. And Charlie's there? Oh, HR, Human Resources. I'm like, who's Charlie? HR, Human Resources. Hey, Ms. Ollie. How you doing? So we are here. Did I forget anyone? Raise your hand if I forgot you. I don't want, yes, we have our police staff in the building, police leadership here. We have our firefighters. We have our ministers in the city here. And, you know, the best of all, we have our residents here. And, you know, we do whatever we can for our residents, so that's an awesome thing. Oh, come on, incognito. Oh, I see that too. Commissioner Spruill is here from the Water Department. Finance is here as well. Finance staff. Clap it up for the finance staff. So we are all in the building here for our wonderful comptroller. We just love our new comptroller. We love our new comptroller. Yeah? Make some noise for our comptroller. Willing to share the information, good, bad, or indifferent. That's a good comptroller when he's willing to share the information. So we thank God for our new comptroller. So I say to all of you, welcome. Continue to share this information that our residents and everyone around our community is aware of what goes on in and throughout our community. Because although many things look bad, there is more good going on in our community than there is bad. So I want everyone to understand that Mount Vernon is continuously moving forward, and we're doing some great things within our city. So just stay tuned and continue to help out, and together we can do anything within our city. Agreed? That's where y'all say amen. Yeah, I know that's right. So at this time, we're going to call up and have our invocation by our Reverend Dr. Stephen Poe from Greater Centennial. Give him a round of applause as he comes.
Good evening, everyone. We are really grateful and thankful for our comptroller producing this report. All of us know it's been many years coming for us to have a report of this kind, so we look forward to his initial report, and we thank him and his department for the hard work that they have put in to produce this report. And as our city council president said, we're going to work with him no matter what the news is. As long as we know the news, we can get through it together. Let us pray. God, we're grateful and thankful for this day. We thank you for all of the great blessings that you've poured already into our lives individually and collectively. God, we ask that you would be with our comptroller as he makes this initial report. And Lord, we ask that you be with the city of Mount Vernon. For God, we need you, and we cannot do anything without you. Thank you for blessing this great city, and continue to be with us. In Jesus' name, amen.
And at this time, we'll have the national anthem by Madison Dunbar, 8th grade student from Denzel Washington School of the Arts. Make some noise for Madison.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn early nights we're so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through whose broad stripes and bright stars through streaming and the rocket oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
You know, I told Maddie to stand here. This is one of my old students from Edward Williams Elementary School as well. And I told her to stand here because it can be nerve-wracking to stand in front of a crowd even to speak. So when you have to sing, we have to continue to, and that was just wonderful how we all came in together. That's what togetherness looks like. So make some noise for Maddie. Good job, Madison. You all may be seated. Now stand back. No, I'm just messing with you. But you can get a little nervous speaking and singing in front of people. You know, I just wrote a selection if you can. No, I'm just messing. So at this moment, we're going to have Kristen Breeze Reed, our Chief of Staff, and she's going to have the Pledge of Allegiance and some words as well. Clap for her.
Good evening, everyone. Can we give another round of applause to Madison Dunbar? She's an 8th grade student at Denzel Washington School of the Performing Arts, and she is a vocal major. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. At this time, and without any further ado, I will introduce the Honorable Dr. Darren Morton to provide the City of Mount Vernon's financial state of the city.
Thank you, Chief Reed, for that introduction or presentation, and also want to thank our Council President, Derek Thompson, for opening us up, welcoming us to this state of the financial state of the city to give an update on our finances for the City of Mount Vernon. Also want to, of course, ask that you will come on and give Madison another round of applause for coming and being with us tonight. We want to thank our young people for all that they do, and we want to encourage them all along the way. We're going to try to get straight to it so we can provide the information to you all and then allow us to begin to work together. Good evening to Madam Mayor Sean Patterson Howard, to President Derek Thompson, to our council members of the City of Mount Vernon, all elected officials, department heads, city employees, and most importantly, to the residents and the taxpayers of the City of Mount Vernon. It is with great pleasure that I present to you tonight the first in a series of financial reports that will provide an updates as well as highlights of our efforts in the Office of the Comptroller, and a preliminary roadmap for us in Mount Vernon for our future financial recovery. Primarily, I will present a quarterly report for the City of Mount Vernon, hereto referred to as the city. And for the particularly for the financial period beginning January 1 to March 31st, 2022. While the financial information is sobering, we, with due diligence, collaboration, and control, in controlling our spending, there is a pathway to financial recovery. Before I review the written report that was distributed last week and the financial activities of our city during this first quarter, I would like to provide context for this presentation that is presented tonight. Pursuant to the city charter, the comptroller is required to provide reports concerning the city's finances for year to date of March 31st, June 30th, September 31st, December 31st of each fiscal year. that inclusive of all departments and agencies. As you know, I assumed the office of Comptroller on January 1st, 2022, after a period of financial uncertainty, lack of financial information, internal controls, and a loss of bond rating. I committed to you competence, professionalism, and accountability. According to Google, a metaphor is given regarding the iceberg, and it illustrates a hidden culture. The world's assumptions, the implied dangers, the habits, the beliefs that may sometimes be consciously articulated and taught, but oftentimes there are many things that are unseen. The metaphor implies that there are dangers, there's necessities of having the skilled pilot, and that justifies the ways in which the cultural experts, as they are there to provide for the culture, but also recognizing that not all things are met at the eye. I would also try to add a little bit of this to that metaphor. In addition to that, it also does not show us the entirety of the situation as we are approaching an iceberg. We see only parts of it, but yet beneath it is so much more. My initial focus was to complete an assessment of the finance department operations, the staff, the roles, the responsibilities, and to determine the status of the city's finances. To that end, I launched an internal review of the existing accounting system, the internal controls, and the bank records. Immediately, we began to initiate an initial financial discovery, and what we found underneath of what was on top was a financial condition that would be considered to be deplorable in its own state. Both the physical forms of the records as well as the electronic accounting system. There were boxes of financial records that were with and without labels. There were some that was labeled in a particular year's orders, and others that was also mixed records with multiple years thrown into a box. The conditions of the financial records made it extremely difficult to establish a starting point to complete an immediate financial analysis. The city's general ledger and budget information is stored in Munis, which is a cloud-based accounting system that is secured by the network. The Munis system integrates our financial and our payroll functions for the city. Unfortunately, upon review of the information stored in Munis, we discovered the following missing information: the adopted budget information from 2019 to 2021, journal entries from 2018 to 2021, including most expenditures, budget transfers, and all of the revenue data. In addition, we also discovered the absence of bank reconciliations from 2018 to 2021. Some of the steps taken to better understand the financial conditions involved gathering bank statements for the last few years, cataloging and opening and closing balances in each of the bank accounts, compiling the information to create a draft unaudited documentation. After consulting with our auditors, O'Connor Davies, and our financial advisors, Capital Markets, it was suggested that we develop a cash flow statement for the last 2 years as a preliminary step to determine our cash on hand and the ability to meet our expenditures for the first quarter while addressing the past and the current liabilities. With the absence of an up-to-date general ledger, we also were required to rely on bank statements to create the cash flow statements. This is not typical approach to developing a cash flow statement. However, it would provide us with the best guesstimate of our financial receipts as well as our expenditures over the last 2 years. The goal of the use for the cash flow statement was to develop a base to approach external partners, including the New York State Comptroller's Office, as well as potential finance institutions, in case the city was in need of cash advances in order to maintain the government operation during the first quarter. In anticipation of the diminishing cash flow as a result of having no property tax revenue for 2022 because the budget cycle had not been completed, we began to contact the New York State Comptroller's Office for alternatives to aid us in an influx of cash, inclusive of the potential short-term loans and or assistance from the New York State Fiscal Restructuring Board. In consultation with the mayor and the city council president, we thought that we needed to explore all options just in case to keep the business of the city moving and services flowing to the residents of Mount Vernon. Since the 2022 city budget had not been approved in January, we had to then, and was projected not to be completed until sometime in February, we had to strategize on ways to secure revenue and to manage the expenses needed in order for us to manage these essential services such as payroll and to address the critical outstanding liabilities that were before us from the previous years. In early January, the departments were asked to submit a list to the Office of the Comptroller of the outstanding vendor obligations for the past few years, so that we could establish the enormity of our liabilities, which totaled at the time $10 million in vendor debts, not to mention the $11 million owed to the New York State Health Insurance Plan, as well as the $14 million that was coming due in February 1st for the New York State retirement benefits. As a result, the early findings from the review of the city's financial records and bank statements confirmed that the city had a significantly deficient cash asset position, with a total of $9.8 million of cash on hand and no cash reserves or fund balance available for us to use. None of it was at our disposal. In fact, it was our best guesstimate that the city was in a negative fund balance situation, owing funds to the Capital Fund, as well as the Internal Service Fund, and some of our escrow accounts. And I'll speak about that later. After we completed the compilation of and review of all of our liabilities, we then determined that it had come to over $61 million in the early part of the quarter. Yet we were not finished with discovering what was to be unearthed. This included $8 million of outstanding vendor and $4 million of legal obligations. $11 million, as I said before, in the health benefits, and $14 million in our retirement fund. These liabilities, of course, fluctuated throughout the quarter as we continued to research and compile information and learn more as we went through all of our records. The failure to adopt the city's budget in accordance with the city budget schedule creates undue harm and significant financial strain upon the city's operations and the residents of Mount Vernon. It is essential for the comptroller to be able to provide information to the mayor and the city council in a timely fashion in order for the budget cycle to begin on time. As we know, had not happened previously. As a result, alternative revenue streams for immediate cash influx was mandatory to continue government operation. Without it, the city's financial position would have rapidly deteriorated, eliminated the capabilities of us to meet our daily expenditures and to bring the city government to a screeching halt. The review of the property tax collection system yielded to us that there was significant amount of property taxes in arrears, and it left an unprecedented amount of accounts receivable in tax payments. As an initial, in the beginning steps, we immediately, in early February, then issued out our arrears notices to every property owner who was on our list as having outstanding payments to the city of Mount Vernon, regardless of the length of time or the amount that was delinquent. The property taxes notices that were sent out to our property owners for at least 2022 and consequently for the years prior to that yielded for us $7.8 million of revenue during the first quarter of the year, which was necessary for us to meet our ongoing operating expenses. Let's talk about these critical expenditures. Most significantly, the most significant cost element for the city is payroll. And I know that there is oftentimes criticism about the amount of salaries that are paid for the city of Mount Vernon. It is important for the residents and the taxpayers of the city of Mount Vernon to understand that government is a service-oriented operation, which hence the payroll cost will be your most significant. Well, our payroll cost was $3 million on a bi-weekly basis, including unfunded employment contract requirements, such as the items that had been committed without any funding pathway. $7.9 million of quarterly general operating expenses is what we yielded in the first quarter. These are operational costs that provide to the city of Mount Vernon the services that are essential. To meet these commitments, the Office of the Comptroller then identified alternative revenue sources, beginning with the review of all of the potential accounts receivables. We noticed that there were a number of items that also had not been billed for previous years and began to also issue out invoices in order to bring in additional revenue. Consequently, the Office of the Comptroller conducted a review of all of the items that were outstanding, regardless of what their status was or regardless of how long they had actually been in arrears. Accordingly, we recognize that these revenues that were brought in helped us get through the first quarter of the year. These main sources of revenue that provided the support for our bi-weekly payroll and for our general operating expenses included, once again, the property taxes from previous years, tax revenue that came in from the state, and general operating revenue that come in from the departments. Now that we've talked about the financial overview of the city and the critical expenses coming into the first quarter, let's talk about cash balances. The city of Mount Vernon began the first quarter of fiscal year 2022 with $9.8 million. In fact, the exact amount of on cash on hand was $9,872,085. By the end of the first quarter, the city had $4,225,616 in its general fund. That did not include the $13,217,713 that was for American Rescue Plan Act funds. Please understand that the ARP funds, as we call them, are reported separately from the general fund in accordance with the guidelines that are provided by the Office of the State Comptroller's Office and GAAP. The ARP funds are treated as unrecognized revenue until it is expensed. As you will recall, the mayor issued out to the city council, and the city council subsequently adopted an ARP budget in which the city is being guided by. Subsequently, the funds that are in ARP are then transferred into the general fund once it has been allocated and expended to cover the expenses in accordance with the eligible criteria. Let's talk about the receipts. During this period, it was important for us to acknowledge that the receipts were important to our operation, and also that we recognize the projected amount of revenue that had been stated in the adopted budget. When we look at these revenues, we recognize that previously that the State Comptroller's Office had criticized the city of Mount Vernon in its 2021-22 report, criticizing us for unrealistic revenue projections. In accordance with the New York State Comptroller's report, the city of Mount Vernon then projected a revenue that could be sustainable based upon several factors. One, the city began to look at the trends as best as they could with the information that they had in order to determine how much the revenue levels would be then adopted for the 2022 budget. For several years, over several administrations, the budget process failed to use actual revenues and expenditure numbers to develop the subsequent year's budget. Thus, in preparing the 2022 fiscal year budget, we did the best that we could based upon the information that was at hand to give a realistic figure for each of the revenue lines, recognizing over the next few years that there will be continued adjustments that will be needed. Unfortunately, without clear financial records, it was difficult for the Comptroller's Office or the administration to then appropriately assign revenues, but we did the very best and gave the only best guesstimate that we could at the time. Having said that, here are some specifics. During the first quarter, total revenues were $19,266,843. You will see that in a figure that is in the report. And this included $7,413,291 in property taxes that had come in from the previous years. As previously stated, without the collection of current year property taxes, which represent over 50% of the city's budget and their projected revenue, the city had to rely on the collection of these previous year revenues in order for us to continue business. It is important for the residents of Mount Vernon to understand the impact of non-payment of property taxes. understanding the struggles that we all are dealing with at this time. The city operation operates on a modified accrual process. In other words, instead of a cash or an accrual process, we are on a modified accrual process, which means that we will recognize the revenue when it is projected. And so therefore, the money that we received from previous years actually is attributed in the general fund and on the balance sheets as revenue for the years in which they were levied. Nevertheless, the amount of money that is spent in a particular year is then attributed to that year's budget. So you can imagine, without revenue and increased expenses, the report for the first quarter looks upside down. The city continues to do its very best to ensure that we balance the budget every year. The $7.4 million is indicated on your statement of revenue and expenditures in order to give a clear picture of how we operated throughout the first year. The projected revenue, based upon equal quarter distributions, should have been $13,555,872, excluding the anticipated property tax, which measures up to $17,258,097. What does that mean? That means that we were minus $17 million for the quarter. In addition, the refuge and sewer fees were $2,253,311. That's the projected amount of money that should come in for the quarter ending on March 31st, 2022. The actual revenues received for this period were $8,848,271, a shortfall of $5,066,601 of the $13 million that was projected. As you will see, the city was potentially looking at a significant deficit. You will notice that there are negative variances that are in several of the non-tax related and departmental revenue lines. It is incumbent on the mayor and the city executives to closely monitor each of these revenue levels and to make sure that they do their very best to address them as immediately as possible. Anything that is more than 5% under its projected target should be adjusted immediately. We are hopeful, however, that the second quarter information will show a significant change because the revenues for the property taxes began in April of 2022. The mayor has informed each of her departments to look closely at the revenue shortfalls and to monitor them on a monthly basis. In fact, the Comptroller's Office is issuing out monthly statements to each of the departments and the City Council as well as the mayor to ensure that we all are keeping a watchful eye on how we are performing against the budget as adopted. We want to ensure that we are not levying any additional burden upon the taxpayers or the residents of Mount Vernon, and that we are continuing the services as essential. But we recognize that there may be a point in which we may need to look at the budget and make the necessary adjustments in order to ensure that there is not a deficit at the end of the year. When you look at the information that is before you, you will see the varying amounts of the revenues, and you'll see them by category in the chart and in the graph, what you will see is that we break them up in accordance to the categories that are laid out by the New York State Comptroller's Office, so that we can ensure that we are able to have uniform reporting into New York State. As you may recall, the city of Mount Vernon has been cited by the New York State Office of the Comptroller for not complying with the state reporting efforts. And since that time, we have ensured that several of our reports, as it pertains to the constitutional tax limits, as well as the tax cap, have been filed. Many of them were in arrears upon taking office in January of 2022. Let's talk about the the expenditures, now that we understand the receipts. The cash expenditures projected for the period, of course, were developed by the same methodology that the revenues were developed, in that we looked at, as best as we could, the trending data that was available to us at the time, and we also made the adjustments as needed. Given the inadequate budget development and the management of the budget over the last decade, it was essential for us to look carefully at the ongoing budget needs, as well as cost analysis needed to be completed. We needed to right-size the budget. And in doing so, looking at these expenditures, the total expenditures for the first quarter of 2022 was $21,544,833. This included $3,141,651 from the ARP expenditures in accordance with the federal guidelines. Salaries and wages amounted to $14,455,479. This included the premium pay that was also issued out as a part of the mayor's initiative and the ARP, through the ARP funds. The city's salaries make up the largest amount of expenditures for the city. However, there are other large expenditures that we must keep in mind. Those that are over $500,000 consist of the insurance premiums, which are $1,460,788. Now, I will tell you that that's an increase of over almost $300,000 from last year. And most of it is because of the number of lawsuits that the city incurred between elected officials and the reputation of the city of Mount Vernon. Social Security, $1.2 million. As I stated before, the state retirement cost, right, for each month cost us $2,540,540. Much of the remaining expenses include current and outstanding vendor obligations that are needed in order to continue the operation of city government. Overtime is a key area of concern. One of the greatest challenges for the city budget compliance. There are significant unfavorable variances in many of these lines. In particular, DPW and the fire department, along with the mayor, must make necessary adjustments to bring overtime cost into compliance with the adopted budget, and or to identify funding in other lines to cover these expenditures. Now, it's easy to say that the overtime lines should be cut. However, cutting overtime lines in some cases also may mean that services also cease. We know that in particular our fire department is having many challenges and also is one of the busiest fire departments in our county. While we are looking to increase the number of firefighters that will help to save some of the cost in the overtime, we must also continue to look for ways to balance both the overtime and the manpower that is needed. The Office of the Comptroller in the months to come will work with these departments to compile information to really do a true cost analysis of these expenditures and look for ways in which we can cut the cost but still maintain the services that are needed. At this time, the police department's overtime levels are on target, inclusive of their overtime that is charged to Con Ed and paid for by Con Ed. You will see these levels on one of the graphs that will show you what are the levels of what was budgeted versus also what has been expended to this point, to this time. As we continue to look at these expenditures, you will also find in the report that we have categorized the expenditures in the major lump sums. You will also see that there are adjustments that are being made as the months go on. The other major expenditures that are of concern, of course, date back to these vendor payments. Let's take some time to look at our vendor payments as it pertains to what we had to pay in this first quarter. The outstanding vendor debt, as previously stated, was over $10 million upon entering into office in January of 2022. You will notice from the charts and the graphs that are given that we have paid off many of the expenditures. Let's break it down. Into the first quarter of 2022, we paid $5,915,010 of the expenditures that were generated in 2021. Again, in 2022, we paid $5.9 million of vendor expenditures that were incurred in 2021, while also paying $7.9 million of 2022 expenditures for vendors. A very deliberate, calculated, balancing act between the administration and the Office of the Comptroller to ensure that essential vendors were paid what was necessary. All of these things have a clear effect upon our fund balance. Oftentimes we hear the public ask the question about what is the status of our fund balance. Well, according to the last city audit, December 31st, 2015, the city had a combined fund balance of $19,246,243. The unrestricted fund balance, which is categorized as committed, assigned, and unassigned, was $15,952,339. That was what was available for the use of the city leadership. Since 2015, the fund balance has not been reconciled, and currently the Office of the Comptroller is compiling data to provide a more accurate reporting of the fund balance levels. The fund balance has been reduced by liabilities incurred by the city since 2015. We know that The last time that the fund balance was used to pay contractual negotiations was for the 2013 to 2017 contracted years. But in addition to that, there are also payments for judgments and settlements, and also to supplement the yearly budget adjustments. In fact, in 2016, $3.1 million was used from the fund balance to balance the 2016, or for 2016, for the 2016-17 budget. As we continue to work through our financial reports and our financial information and enter the information into the system, we will have a better understanding of where our fund balance is at this time. But once again, it is our best guesstimate that our fund balance will owe some of our other funds because of things like judgments, seized amounts for judgments, and over expenditures of budgets in years past. Let's talk about the liabilities. At the close of the first quarter, we had identified that we had moved a little bit from $61 million in liabilities to $63 million in liabilities, having paid off some of the liabilities, but also identified additional liabilities. The increase in the city liabilities far outpace our ability to generate revenue to cover these expenditures. Some of the factors include the growth of the retirement and health insurance costs, poor budgeting, development practices, and an increase in the tax certiorari obligations. On December 31st, 2021, the city retirement, liability was $14 million. The health was $11 million. I want to keep saying that to you because I want to make sure you understand what the cost is for the benefits cost. Since December, we have entered into agreements with the New York State Retirement Office that will allow us to have lower monthly payments, as well as to amortize a certain portion of it for the next 12 years. This allowed us to better manage the liability rather than having even a lower cash flow throughout the first quarter. The outstanding health liability has now grown to $21 million, and we recently paid a little over $5 million on that arrears. We are also in discussions with the New York State Civil Service Office about a similar arrangement as the New York State Retirement Fund. Many of the other liabilities were created, again, by poor decision-making and planning on the part of the city leadership at the time. Several years of contracted agreements, several years of decisions are now standing before us as being due for the city to pay. Over the past few administrations, city leadership has failed to consider the actual budget constraints and the negative financial impact in entering into some agreements. In part, these unfavorable liabilities include a $5 million Metro-North Bridge agreement from 2017, a $4 million Salvatore Gizzo versus Mount Vernon judgment in 2018, a $3.6 million New York Power LED light lease finance agreement in 2018, $4.1 million outstanding legal fees from 2018 to 2020, an outstanding balance of $900,000 from a 2019-20 red light camera agreement, and $2.4 million in a mega beverage redemption center versus Mount Vernon judgment in 2021. Many of these liabilities could have been avoided. And as we look forward to we must make sure that all of the elected officials are working in concert and also are carefully reviewing the not only immediate benefits, but the long-term benefits or cost to the city for such agreements, such arrangements, and the potential of legal liabilities. All of these liabilities stem from, again, administrative and mayoral and administrative decisions over the last few decades. Again, it is not my role to point fingers at anyone, nor am I standing here to do so, but to give you the facts of the matter. That oftentimes poor decisions roll forward, not carefully calculating the cost, not having a cost-benefit analysis completed. For example, it was intended that by converting the streetlights to LED, that it would save the city money. Unfortunately, the city has not realized that benefit as of yet. And as of present, we are paying about $57,000 a month for this lease or financing agreement. And the cost benefit, the benefit from the conversion does not equal the benefit of the payment to date. The Metro-North obligation originally started earlier in 2014 with a $1.8 million commitment that was funded by a federal grant from one of our congressmen, or senators actually. In addition, however, the contract for this grant was never executed, and the money was reallocated to another community. In addition, an additional $3.2 million commitment was made, bringing the total to $5 million of obligation for the city for the Metro-North bridges. Unfortunately, there was no pathway made to meet this obligation, and thus it now is carried on our balance sheet as a liability. Once again, it is incumbent upon us as elected officials to be very careful about the decisions that we make, and or to make sure that there's a pathway to cover the cost of our decisions. As we look at these liabilities, we cannot forget that what is not included in my numbers are the potential liabilities that lay before us. One, we recognize that there is currently a double-digit million-dollar claim by Kayla Tennis. In addition, we have obligations to our unions for contract agreements. As we look at these union contract agreements, collective bargaining are major liabilities for the city if they are not executed correctly. Previous collective bargaining agreements for all of our unions covered the period of 2013 to 2017 and have not been completed for the subsequent years. However, in 2019, an agreement was signed with the Uniformed Firefighters Association, UFFA, and in 2021, UFFA received a Public Employment Relations Board, known as PERB, decision awarding a cumulative $14% salary increase for the period of 2018 to 2021. This impacted the 2022 fiscal year budget by $1.9 million that needed to be added to the budget. And what is outstanding is an obligation for $5.7 million for the arrears payments to fulfill this PERB agreement. Also in 2019, a reopening clause was signed by the mayor. There is a projected $2.1 million that the city will need to pay as a result of this recent decision to the Local 456 Teamsters for their contract years of 2013 to 17. In essence, the PERB decision stated that the city was obligated then to raise the percentages that had been issued out to Local 456 Teamsters for their 2013-2017 contract to be on pay parity with the fire union for the same period. Accordingly, the city will need to identify $2.1 million. What is pending? There are several other union contracts that are pending. The city must act in good faith when negotiating union contracts. Therefore, the city must explore all possibilities to enter fair contract negotiations and provide a pathway to pay anything that is agreed upon. Unfortunately, neither of these negotiated commitments accounted for nor offered the financial means to pay those obligations that now stand before us. In addition, there are also, because of the fund balance not having sufficient funding, also there is no pathway to pay these commitments through the fund balance. Undoubtedly, the union members, union employees deserve equal pay to their counterparts in the county, and in some cases, even exceeding compensation for the work that they do in the city. Regrettably, however, the city does not have an immediate access to capital through its fund balance nor through bond issuance. Given the historic context and considering the possibilities for the other unions, that is, the Police Benevolent Association, the CSCA, and the Local 456 Teamsters, to receive pay parity based upon the salaries, the rates that were given to the Uniformed Firefighters Association. If the city is required to do so, the anticipated liability would grow by $15 to $20 million. In fact, when you look at the analysis, you will see that based upon the decisions that have already come down and the potential decisions that will need to be made, there for the 2013-2017 contracts, it is $2.2 million. For the 2018 to 2021 contracts, without having completed the cost analysis for CSEA and Local 456, the Uniformed Firefighters and the Police Benevolent Association would cost $18,893,810. We still have to add, again, CSEA and Local 456. These are some harsh realities, but I don't want you to believe that there's not a pathway forward. There is a pathway forward, and it relies upon us to do our due diligence to, one, lower our cost, to increase our revenues, and for us to complete our financial records so that we then will have greater borrowing power and also have access to additional funding. So not all is lost and not all is grim, but we all will have to work together in order for us to be able to cure the problems that lie before us. Again, we have a responsibility as leadership not to overpromise or underperform when entering into contracts with our union employees. They deserve better than that. Likewise, we have to also encourage our union representatives to also embrace a transparent, productive, and collaborative critical analysis of the city's financial position while exploring creative contract negotiations. We must find a way to partner in this. Once again, our employees are our greatest asset. In particular, the Office of the Comptroller will continue to work on the financial discovery, completing of the annual audits, and we will also seek alternative financing in order for us to support the contract negotiations that lie before us and hopefully come to some resolve. It will not be easy, but it is work that we have to do together. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about the American Rescue Plan Act funds. I want to provide some clarity for you today. The city of Mount Vernon was awarded $41 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. There are federal regulations that govern these funds that we are to address the challenges that the city experienced as a result of COVID. The federal government mandates that the ARP, as we call them, funds, are allocated in accordance to the eligible categories that have been laid out in their documentation. There are 6 categories: infrastructure, negative economic impacts, services to disproportionately affected communities, governmental services, premium pay, and general administration. Let me bring clarity to 2 of them. General administration is related to the city's need to administer the money that was given to us for ARPA. The governmental services the city, based upon its category, can allocate up to $10 million without justification for governmental services. But once again, these things, anything beyond that, must also be tied to a revenue reduction formula. Unfortunately, because of our financial state, we are unable to complete a revenue reduction formula at this time and therefore are unable to add additional money to this category. Please also note that while it sounds like this category is broad, it is not. There are some things that the federal government clearly outlined that we can and cannot do. For example, one, we cannot pay judgments or settlements. We cannot pay for the contract negotiations. And there are some other benefits that also for employees that we cannot pay for. In May of 2021, we received our first tranche, which was $20 million. The City Council, the Board of Estimates adopted a proposed budget from the mayor, and the city has been operating on that through that adopted budget since its adoption, unless it comes back to the City Council for adjustment. As of March 31st, 2022, the total expenditures from that $20 million was $7,336,616, leaving a balance of a little over $13.2 million. There was $4.1 million expended in 2021. And a little over $3 million expended in the first quarter of 2022, remembering that 2.5 of that actually belonged to the premium pay. In May of 2022, we also received the second of the tranche, which currently is on hand and will be administered according to the budget that has been adopted by the City Council and the Board of Estimates. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of conversation about audits and the city's ability to get financing. As you know, the city's last completed audit was 2015, and we are in the process of completing the 2016 audit. I am happy to report that we have received a draft of the 2016 audit from our auditors, in which we are now reviewing and preparing for comment so that we can complete the audit over the next 2 months at the latest for distribution to the public. This will help us at least move our financial operation along. Also, I'm happy to report that our financial records for 2017 are in good order and are prepared to be turned over to our auditor when they are ready to receive them. The regular city audits and single audits, in accordance to the uniform guidance, as well as the internal control findings that were provided to us from the New York State Comptroller's Office, will ensure that we will be able to make the necessary reportings to New York State as required for the 2016 year. Given the amount of insufficient financial records from 2018 to 2021, the Comptroller's Office plans to seek additional external accounting services to help to expedite the compilation of these reports so that we can expedite our potential to identify alternative revenue streams. Without completing these reports and receiving our bond rating, the city would not be able to issue bonds. However, as we expedite the reporting requirements and complete unaudited statements, there is a great possibility, based upon the city's level of debt, that we will be able to seek other alternatives, such as tax anticipation notes and bond anticipation notes. As a part of the Comptroller's report, we must also report to you on the agencies. Well, here are the reports. If you look at the documents that have been submitted, you will find in the back of the report a report for each of the city's agencies. The Board of Estimates and the Board of Water Supply, the Mount Vernon Urban Renewal, and the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agencies for the same period as we reported for the city. These written reports are independent reports that provide a comprehensive overview of their operations. The Board of Water Supply had $2.6 million in revenue and $2.58 million in expenditures by the ending of the period of reporting. They also had a $25 billion surplus, $25,000 surplus, not million, $25,000 surplus. I'm trying to give them some money. The Mount Vernon Urban Renewal Agency had a cash deficit of $23,000. I don't know why I want to make them millions. $23,000 that yielded from its expenditures of $934,000 and of its revenue of $934,000 and its expenditures of $958,000. Again, I'm rounding those numbers off. Please understand, though, that the Mount Vernon Urban Renewal Agency operates on its grant cycles and its cash flows of money that come in and out. And so, again, their reporting will fluctuate. The Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency ended its period with a negative cash position of $106,000, again rounding it off, as a result of $414,000 of revenue and $166,469 in expenditures. Please note that the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency currently is in revoked status and was in revoked status prior to 2020. Under the leadership of Mayor Sean Patterson Howard and the Commissioner Spruill, the Mount Vernon Board of Water Supply is in full fiscal accountability. The audits from 2016 to 2018 have been completed, and the audit for 2019 to 2020 are engaged with the accounting firm O'Connor Davies. The internal controls and the separate duties have been instituted with a new integrated utility management system. The accounting and the business policies have been created and are in compliance with the auditor's recommendations and, of course, GAAP. We have new management policies that were adopted by the City Council. So the Board of Water Supply is also making reports to the City Council and the Comptroller's Office. There are additional efforts that are happening in the Board of Water Supply in that there's a lockbox system on its way. There is accounts receivable programs that are being instituted as well to improve the operations. The Mount Vernon Urban Renewal Agency is in full compliance with HUD and periodically goes under program audits in which they have been of recent no findings to their programs and are administering finances and money that are given from the federal government in accordance to their policies and their regulations. The Mount Vernon Urban Renewal Agency is also transitioning to a uniform accounting system with the city of Mount Vernon. The Mount Vernon Urban The Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency, as I stated before, has been in revoked status. However, the agency has been working with the county IDA to review any pilot applications that are submitted to the city of Mount Vernon. However, it has been the position of the Mount Vernon Industrial Development Agency not to move forward with pilots aggressively, but to carefully review any of those applications that come into the agency based upon the needs of this community. In addition, the agency is reorganizing its financial model to better serve Mount Vernon. That includes the restructuring of the Uniform Tax Exemption Policy, also known as UTEP. The Office of the Comptroller will continue to collaborate with these agencies, and in fact, will also assist them in developing the RFPs for any additional finance needs for the years to come, including the audits that are missing for those years. Let's talk about path forward and bring this home. All of the reports that have been provided to you provide a current state of the city's finances, inclusive of the agencies that are now reporting into the Office of the Comptroller. We meet periodically to make sure that we are on the same page as to it pertains to the reporting requirements. Preliminary results of the second quarter of this year indicate that the city is in a better cash position. In fact, you should know that the city property tax collection to date has been $32,914,701. The city refuge fee has been $2,867,881. You will notice the percentages. The percentage of tax collection for property tax is 51.3%. The percentage of collection for the refuse fee is 42%. Please understand that both of these, the tax and the fees, were necessary in order to ensure that we were able to meet a particular level of service to the residents of Mount Vernon. Please note that it is the position of the Office of the Comptroller that we will carefully evaluate and analyze the tax system as well as also the fee structure. As we look at what the city is required to do to meet the requirements of our taxpayers and our residents, we are emphasizing to the mayor's office, the department administrators, and the city council that we continue to carefully review not only the financial operation, but also the programmatic as well as the service operation of the city. And that periodically that we continue to do these internal audits of areas in which there are huge variances that come before us and need our immediate attention. The cash flow of the city of Mount Vernon will improve, and it will improve through strong leadership and collaboration between the Office of the Comptroller, the Office of the Mayor, and the City Council. I believe that over the last few months that we have been able to demonstrate that each of the parties understand and know that there's a role and a responsibility to be good stewards of the public's money. Please note, you will not find flash from the Office of the Comptroller. It is not my responsibility to make people feel good, but it is my responsibility to do as I said I would do. Provide competence, professionalism, and accountability to the financial operation of this city. Before I end tonight, I want to first of all thank the the Office of the Comptroller and the Department of Finance staff for the hard work that they have done. Please note, they do not have an easy task with a leader such as me. I recognize the requirements and I recognize the expectation, but the results are that we are able to provide solid, transparent, and true information to the taxpayers and the residents of Mount Vernon. So at this time, I'm going to ask that all of the staff of the Department of Finance please stand and let's give them a round of applause. And while we have a small staff, please note that we don't have a complete staff. We have advertised and have continued to advertise for positions in order to make sure, because I am praying true to the need for competence and professionalism. And we will continue to do so to fill those gaps, to ensure that we do have a person who is responsible for analyzing the budget. Here's the path forward. Here's the path forward, Mount Vernon. A strategic approach in the Office of the Comptroller. It will include partnering with the elected officials, the department heads, and external partners to complete the 2016 through 21 audits. In particular, to complete the 2016 audit before the third quarter of this year. To identify new revenue streams, including bond anticipation notes, federal and state grants, non-residential tax opportunities to support the general fund activities and the capital expenditures. To reduce the reduction of expenditures by streamlining government, digitizing operations, repositioning resources, and establishing a robust shared services initiative. We in the school district and the library and all other public entities must work together to save costs for the residents of Mount Vernon. We will also explore initiatives for taxpayers to satisfy their outstanding tax payments prior to commencing the in-rem process. We do not want people leaving their homes. We want people to stay in their homes. We want to provide an avenue to do so. Please note, we have a significant amount of taxes that are in arrears. And in fact, the amount is approximately over $20 million of outstanding tax arrears. We will employ an initiative to work with our property owners to ensure that the city receives these taxes and also that our taxpayers are not displaced if possible. Also, we will leverage the sale of city-owned property to generate revenue and to restore these properties back to the tax rolls. Please note, the last auction was in 2016. The last in-rem process that we have documentation for, however, we're still researching, was 2014, but we believe there's a 2016 list. So many have come to the office looking for a list. We cannot give you a list because we are still looking through the piles of records to see where this information is or what was the actual last time that the in-rem process had been complete. Lastly, we will also comply with the recommendations of the New York State Comptroller's Office, the audit reports from the series of years in which they audited Mount Vernon. This will require that we will have external consultants and experts to assist us in these efforts. Please note that it is not the position of this comptroller for us to spend needlessly funds of the city, but we will acquire the necessary expertise in order for us to ensure that there are policies in place, internal control practices are implemented, that we are also exercising cost analysis, and there's ongoing budget review and discussion in order to ensure that we are best maximizing the use of the adopted budget. Here's my closing. There is a metaphor that I read by Thomas Banasserer regarding an ocean liner. And here's how it reads. Imagining an ocean liner or aircraft carrying or a supertanker that needed to make a 180-degree turn. While walking, you can turn around in less than a second. While driving, if there is no traffic, you can do a U-turn in less than 20 seconds. However, imagine a supertanker on the ocean needing to take a 160-degree turn. It takes much longer. The practice here is patience. A useful question is, what will help me to stay present during this time rather than just hold my breath and wait or complain on the side with ill intention, false information, and no regard for the hard-working people of Mount Vernon? The road to financial recovery is like maneuvering an ocean liner. It is an evolving process. Let's have patience and not force. Yet, let's be deliberate, engaging, and collaborative. The Office of the Comptroller is committed to transparency to the residents of Mount Vernon and accountability for good stewardship of the public finances. Future reports, providing quarterly reports, will reflect the evolving information, the adjustments in our cash position as we complete compilation and a financial analysis of the data through an ongoing discovery process, bank reconciliations, and working with our external financial and auditing experts. Thank you, Mount Vernon, for your confidence. The Office of the Comptroller is committed to adhering to the guidelines of the State Comptroller's Office. God bless you, and God bless Mount Vernon.